Don't forget, you're going to die.
The WeCroak Podcast is back. I am your host, Hansa Bergwall. Thank you for joining us. We'll have new episodes coming out all this fall long. We've got a ton saved up already, so look out for those. Also, we're on YouTube now too, so if you prefer to watch these interviews as well as just listen to them, look for us at YouTube/@WeCroak. You'll find us. Drop us a follow, and watch us have these conversations as well if you would like to do that. Otherwise, they'll still be coming out on our usual podcast channels. Today, we have an amazing episode for you. It's with Brittney Hartley, who is, I think, a fantastic current thinker on nihilism, because I think nihilism is one of the most important problems today. And I think she is an important thinker on what nihilism is and how to survive it and even thrive in the face of it. So without further ado, let's join the conversation. All right, here we go. Britt Hartley, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And you came to my attention for a number of different reasons. You're, I think, a really fantastic thinker on a number of topics. And one of them is your approach to nihilism. You're actually a nihilism recovery coach, which I think is one of the big themes of our both, political and like existential moment. So I'm excited to get into that. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Could you start by just introducing yourself to our audience? Who are you? Maybe share a little bit of your story.
Sure, I'll try to keep it brief here, but essentially I was raised Mormon and had a Mormon faith crisis, went into Christianity, have my all but dissertation in theology, and so really took these questions of an existential nature very seriously. They've been what I've been thinking about since I was a teenager. And in theology school, lost my faith in God, which is actually not that uncommon of a thing to happen. And for me, not for everyone, but for me, that kind of flung me headfirst into nihilism, and found myself needing resources for that space, and digging into existential philosophy and absurdism and nihilism. Eventually was able to feel like I was thriving post nihilism. And now the majority of my work, I did do a 2-year program in spiritual direction somewhere in there. And so now the majority of my work is meeting people wherever they are on that spectrum, whether that's deconstructing either religion or whatever they're deconstructing, or being at kind of that rock bottom place, nihilism, where you feel like you don't have any anchors at all, to kind of like that rebuilding stage where you're having to build things that religions previously gave us, like meaning and purpose and tools for death and ritual and things like that. So that's kind of the spectrum that I operate under now.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. In the LGBT community, we get a lot of people leaving the Mormon church because they are rejected for who they are. And of all the things that people leave, I think one of the tropes is the people who leave the Mormon church have it the hardest. And I'm wondering if you have any insight as to why that is.
Sure. So Mormonism is what's called a high demand religion. Some would say the word cult. That tends to not be a word that lends to productive conversation, although, we could talk about where it falls on the bite model of cults. But because Mormonism is such a high demand religion that is really insular as far as community, you really build your entire identity and life around this thing. So it's your morality, it's your meaning, it's your purpose, it's your awe, it's your identity, it's your community, it's your marriage, it's how you're raising your children, it's your rituals. It's literally every aspect of your life. Even the underwear you wear and what you eat is dictated by Mormonism. And so when you find out something like Mormonism isn't true, or Joseph Smith isn't who you thought he was, or the Book of Mormon isn't historical, it essentially like takes the floor out from under you. And that can be very difficult. It's like being 40 years old and being a newborn baby. Like, you truly have nothing because you've built it on this foundation. Mormons are also more likely to be atheists than other groups that deconstruct. And I think the reason for that is uh, some religions that are older, there's a lot that's shrouded in mystery. Whereas with Mormonism, we actually get to see how scripture is made, how a person becomes a person to a prophet to a legend. And because Mormonism is such a recent religion and it was a record keeping religion, we actually see we actually have, a good window into how this religion was formed, and you get to see how the sausage is made. And once you go through that process, it makes it difficult to go to other religions when you've already peeked behind that curtain.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like when you went through your, I'll call it nihilistic crisis that you referenced
Mm-hmm.
before, that was really a part of it, that there was really nothing left to hold on to from before times. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it didn't hit all at once with Mormonism. I kind of kept deconstructing, but for people who keep that bulldozer of deconstruction going, where they start deconstructing not only their religion but then God, and then free will, and then sense of self, and then gender, and then capitalism. Like, when you start kind of doing this postmodern deconstruction of looking for something solid in any of these things, and you find that these are just humans doing what humans do, it can be disorienting. And the end of that road is nihilism, where you've lost every social and psychological anchor, which is why a lot of people describe it as floating. I'm floating in the void. I don't have any way to make a decision. I don't have any sense of up and down. It's just very disorienting for a brain.
Can you share a little bit about what being in that place was like for you? And
Yeah, right now I'm in a place where I can like speak all these nice words about nihilism, and there's certainly some things that I think are beautiful about going to that place and buildings. There's an honesty in nihilism that I appreciate. But the reality is, when I was in it, it did not feel like I was going anywhere. I mean, I was uh, and if stories of suicidal ideation are difficult for you, then this is maybe the time I speak about it openly, and I'm going to do so now. So if that's not where you're at, then please turn it off at this point. But for about 2 years, I had suicidal ideation, because I just really felt like, what is the point? We just come to this earth, and it's just evolution, and we just have all these evolutionary biases, and we just work and die. Like, what is the point of all of this? And my brain kept looking for a story. And we get that from religion, this idea that there should be a grand narrative that would make sense of things. And when I kept looking and never found one, my brain just kind of shut down. It just didn't know what to do. Our brains operate with stories, and I didn't have one. And it was depression, and it wasn't the kind of depression that, like, oh, you just need sunshine and friends and vitamin D and these kinds of things. It was a depression. It was existential depression that was fueled by my nihilism, and then the nihilism starts fueling the depression, and it's a downward spiral into a very, very dark place. So it was very difficult to get through, and part of my meaning and purpose in life now is meeting people and witnessing people in that place, because I did go through that alone.
how did you climb out of that and find a way to work with stories again after letting go of
Yeah.
an older story that didn't serve you anymore?
Yeah, that's a long story, because it's like, well, how do you build a life? And it's like, well, there's a lot that goes into that. But I think the biggest shift that kind of got me going was, I couldn't find any meaning as far as like the universe giving us any meaning. And I'm such a headspace person that nihilism just was a thought loop that I couldn't think myself out of. But I did have children then, and there was something happening in my body when my son would get off the bus stop and look for my face and light up when he saw my face and run to me and give me a hug. There was something in my body that said, this is meaningful. Now, rationally, I had no way to make sense of that, but my body was saying something else. My body was saying, even if the universe doesn't care about this moment and this planet blows up and there's no witness to any of this, even if that's true, this moment where my son is running to me feels meaningful. And there was a shift there that maybe life isn't about some grand story outside of me. Maybe life is meant to be experienced. And what would a life worth experiencing be like? And that seems very simple and maybe obvious to other people. But if you're raised in religion, your brain just doesn't think like that, because we work from kind of an outward story in. And so I just started to think, well, what if I'm going to die? What's a life worth experiencing look like for me? And it was not the life I was in, right? And that actually gave me a path of, there are things that I could do that could make life more meaningful and even enjoyable at the level of experience. And what would that look like for me? And then taking kind of big risks in that direction, because I'm so now aware that I'm going to die, that society's pressures or people whispering about me or people judging me, I could push through that and get some existential courage to actually create a life that is worth experiencing just for the ride, even though the ride ends.
So that insight, if I'm going to die, what does a
Mm-hmm.
life worth living look like to me? Of course, it's very much at the heart of
Right.
what we do here at WeCroak.
Yes.
And I know that the culture out there does not encourage that kind of thinking
Right.
95% of the time. So I'm really curious, how did you encounter that sort of death salience insight thinking, or where did that come from? Or did it arise spontaneously?
That was one that kind of arose spontaneously for me. And of course, like, it's one of those things that I've had so many insights along the way that do feel like they arose naturally by me thinking about these things. And then you go to like research it. And of course, people have been talking about, the Stoics have been talking about memento mori for a long time, certainly much longer than I've been thinking about this. So it was one of those things that I see now echoed in a lot of places. I see it in particularly secular Buddhism. I see it in Stoicism. There's even some of that in absurdism. There's lots of conceptual ideas for actually making death a friend. But for me, that was something that I kind of got to on my own and then realized I wasn't alone in that insight. And it's something that I do return to again and again. If I wake up and I'm really struggling, and I often, as someone is more neurotic than most in my personality type, I'll wake up on the wrong side of the bed. And one of my favorite kind of self meditations that I do is I really imagine that I'm 90 years old. My brain is Swiss cheese. My body doesn't respond to me anymore more. Like, this is it. This is the last week of my life. And I really get into it. It sounds morbid at first. It can be even maybe difficult at first. Now it's something more natural. And I just really inhabit that body. And then I jump into my 39-year-old body, and I get to wake up and my hips don't hurt, and my 6-year-old can still kind of come in the morning and lay down on my chest, and I can make French toast and it's delicious. I still have my taste buds, and I sometimes will start my day on my deathbed in order to jump into the magic of what it is to be alive today. So if you can get over that hurdle of that resistance to death, which of course you talk about all the time, I found it to be a well that helps me to live life more fully, which is of course something that you do all the time.
That's a really good one, actually, starting the day on your deathbed and just imagining
Mm-hmm.
that as a insight exercise. I've done that one. It's really good for anyone out
Yeah,
there looking to try a powerful, death salience meditation. That one's really good.
I really like that one. Yeah.
And all right, so you have this insight. You feel something that feels like it's worth living for. Just that impulse of, my kids matter to me. What's more natural than that? But then now you've connected with so many different tools and modalities, from Stoicism to secular Buddhism. I think I see on your sort of information about you, you're an ordained Sufi. How did you go about connecting with new wisdom traditions, tools? and
Yeah.
telling the difference between what might be useful and what might be another downward spiral that wasn't good for you, because there's plenty of
Yeah.
both out there.
Yeah, so I started with this thought of like how good could life get at the level of experience, and I didn't know. And it was more one of those jumps. I'm not naturally optimistic, so it wasn't like, "Oh, I'm going to find my bliss." Like I was still really skeptical and really depressed and nihilistic then, but I was suffering so much that and this is where rock bottom can sometimes be very helpful, and even addicts will talk about rock bottom in this way, where it's like I'm suffering so much, I feel like I already am dead in so many ways. Like, what am I holding on to here? What do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose. I have nothing. So I may as well try and see what a radically authentic life living for the experience would look like. And so I started off in that direction. I got some help with psychedelics, which we can talk or not talk about, that just gave me that nervous system reset that I needed and gave me some neuroplasticity and a little bit of energy to then start gathering tools for what it would be like to build a life from the inside out rather than the outside in. And what I
Yeah,
essentially okay, go ahead.
let's pause there, just because
Okay,
that's a
yeah, uh-huh.
big recommendation in your story with
Sure, yeah.
many pluses and pitfalls, I think.
Yes, yes,
What
yes.
ones did you engage with? Were you out on
Sure.
your own? Were you finding
Yeah.
it in some sort of therapy or therapy like
Yeah.
set and setting?
Sure. So it was about 2 years from the time I decided that I wanted to do this, from reading Michael Pollan, to the time that I found a guide that I trusted, because I had such I had some level of religious trauma. I was really wary about the vulnerable place that I would be in, and someone maybe guiding me to somewhere that I didn't consent to. And I, as someone who doesn't use substances, of course, I was raised Mormon. I never developed a taste for alcohol or anything like that. I was very wary of this. So I did wait 2 years and kind of whisper and ask around till I found a guide that I trusted. I did psilocybin, which is the one that's most recommended for existential crisis, because psilocybin, it's working for PTSD. It's working for a lot of people for treatment resistant depression, for OCD, for PTSD, because the thing that those things have in common is getting stuck in thought loops that you can't think yourself out of. And psilocybin can often be a reset to be able to look at those things from a different perspective, which is why they seem to be helpful. And we have, a lot of data showing that it's helpful for that. So I did have a guide, and I did do like post trip integration with that guide that was super important for integrating. And I really see and recommend psychedelics or specifically psilocybin for, if you don't have a family history of things like bipolar or schizophrenia or things like that might put you at risk. I find it to be something that does a couple things. For one, it can help you mourn things. Like I cried out a lot of things during my trip. It can help you to just get a reset, because if I'm trying to help a nihilist but they don't have any energy to even look at the resources that I'm giving them, that can get them really stuck. It can also just open up your feelings again, because we're going to need your core values and your resonances if we're talking about building your authentic story. And if you can't remember the last time you felt something, that makes it more difficult. So it just kind of gives you a reset across the board. And the combination of getting new resources for nihilism in the couple weeks after a trip, when your brain is a little bit squishy, tends to just accelerate the process out of that black hole. And it did for me. Any follow-up questions there?
Yeah, I'm curious, especially as someone who's gone through a major religious deconstruction and then went into the psychedelic direction, if you had an ecstatic or a mystical experience on
Mm.
these and what you did with that, or if it was something other.
Yeah, I have had glimpses of mystical experiences on psychedelics. I use them less and less. For me, I really recommend this idea of, even Ram Dass will talk about this. Like, I really think it's great for opening doors in the mind so that you can remember what it's like to just be the way you were, hopefully when you were a child. That playfulness and that just being place. And it can just help nihilists to remember that that place exists when they haven't felt like that for so long. But the work is done in between the trips, and hopefully you're integrating to the point that you can kind of shortcut that place and walk into those places with your sober mind. So there's something that there are things that I do less and less now as I do kind of the integrating work in between. I'm sorry, what was your question? I got sidetracked there. Oh, mystical
Ecstatic or
experiences.
mystical
Yeah,
experience. Was that that way for you?
yeah, I have had glimpses of that. Neil Brennan talked about, he went from being an atheist to saying he believes in God after having some of those experiences. For me, as someone who just has such a high level of skepticism, uh, and BS sensitivity to the woo, I'm open to it being something, magical, but I'm also open to this just being states of consciousness that we can experience. So for me, it didn't lead me back to God, but it certainly kind of opened me up to the magic of reality, if we can say that. The vast majority of my trips are hard trips or bad trips. I'm usually
Okay.
on this floor right here crying. So that's just the
Therapeutic.
nature of my psyche. They're not enjoyable drug experiences for me. I usually find some new aspect of nihilism, where the deep cave of my subconscious. Um, so I cry a lot on mine, but I have had glimpses of that, and can get into those places of just being, those mystical states. I can now access more and more without the drugs.
It sounds like you're fairly wary of them, though. Would that be a correct summation of what you just said?
I'm not wary of experiencing them. I'm
Okay.
wary of this move that we make as humans that says, because I experience this, then this is, therefore X is true about ultimate reality. So like, just because people do DMT and experience space elves does not necessarily mean space elves exist. If you talk to an alien on a trip, it doesn't mean aliens exist. If you had a feeling that the Book of Mormon is true, that doesn't mean that it is. If you believe that you've been talking to God in your prayers, that doesn't mean that God necessarily exists. That's the move that whenever we look back and we see humans having a subjective experience, and then we make some claim about ultimate reality, whenever we look back at us doing that, we were always wrong. Like, we're always wrong about when we do that. So this is what I love about mysticism, is that mysticism values the experience of what people have called God without caring what words or mouth sounds you use to describe that. And it doesn't put boxes and religions and dogmas and church manuals around it. They just want you to experience it. So I've been in places where, like, Christian mystics and atheist mystics and Sufi mystics and the mushroom mystics, they all get together and they get along beautifully, because nobody's trying to convert anyone else. There's no truth claims. There's no like, you're lost and going to hell. We're all just sharing how everybody's experienced this thing that people have called God. And that allows me to play in that space without doing the therefore game that we're always wrong about.
Yeah. When I think about some of these, ecstatic doors like psychedelics or really intense meditation work, there's a lot of different ways. They've been really important in my journey as well. And I wouldn't give them up for anything. And at the same time, I think we have to reckon with that they make us very vulnerable. That if we do them in a unsafe set and setting where you have this profound mystical experience, that like see God experience, and then the person who showed you that open door says, and this is the truth about the world.
Yeah.
You're very vulnerable to then, getting sucked into a cult or a religion that's not good for you, or some sort of person who you think is, who opened this door for you is, can then abuse you by telling this kind of thing. So I really liked, you're open to the experience, but you're going to be guarded against, that next thing of Like, how do
Yeah.
we engage with these things without opening it, like, more safely? Is it about finding the right guide? Is it about just having that skepticism at the outset that what I
Yeah.
experience here, it doesn't mean that space elves are forming a conspiracy, in our
Yeah.
government or something, which is, I've
Yeah.
seen
Yeah. Go ahead.
people go off the deep end as well with
Yes.
psychedelic
I've lost a few
stuff.
people. I've lost a few people in the psychedelic space where, like, I'll go talk to them and they're talking about they're exploring the 14th out of the 16th dimension, and I feel like I've lost them in some way to these rabbit holes. So we're right to say that swimming in your subconscious is not something to do lightly. For me, it certainly accelerated my path out of nihilism. But for some people, especially without guardrails, we can lose them in this space. So yes, finding a good guide is great, but really the key shift that I think keeps people really safe is continually asking the question, "What does this say about me?" rather than what is true. Because when we start doing what is true, our ego can sneak into that, where people are claiming to be divine and have some divine mission of raising consciousness. We get delusions of grandeur with people doing psychedelics sometimes. We get It's almost like this: you get an ego by telling people you have an ego death, which is so strange. I especially see this in like the male Costa Rica ayahuasca space, where they kind of like flex on each other how many ego deaths that they've had, which is really funny. And so I think the key here is, rather than say, does this exist, or um or getting into the ego of it, or getting lost in the rabbit holes of it, just turning it back to, what does this experience say about me? What does it say about my fears? What does it say about my desires? What does it say about my shadow self? What does it point to as far as places that need to be integrated in my life that are disconnected from me? And a good guide, or a good mystic, or a good coach it will help you do that, to kind of pull that back to yourself, so that you're using these experiences as a mirror, rather than, as the new religion that just gives you some kind of grandeur and safety.
Yeah. What does this mean about myself? Can you give an example of how that works, of, experience, and then asking that question rather than what if this is true?
Hmm. Yeah. Let me think. So like the last um Yeah, I'll give you two examples. So one trip that I had, I really wanted to connect to nature. So I went up to a cabin with some friends, and I wanted to go outside because my friends would always talk about, like, oh, I gave names to the trees and I became best friends with that tree. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I want to experience that. But of course, like in my neuroticism, like that's not what I experienced. I went outside and everything was gray. I actually lost color, which was really interesting. Everything was gray and ashy, like after a fire outside. And so rather than have that be like, oh, what is that saying about the nature of reality? What it was really saying is, you haven't mourned yet that nature is violent and inherently brutal, and you're having a hard time making peace with the violent nature of nature itself. And so I just then had to like think about that and kind of mourn that, because of course, like when you're raised in religion, for one, you don't think about animals or nature at all, because humans kind of have dominion over them. But there was a mourning that I hadn't done yet for the world not being what I thought it was. Because when I was a kid, I thought that everything was going to be okay. I thought that anything that suffered in this life, it was going to be worth it in the end. And I had never really fully mourned that I'd lost that. And so turning that experience, rather than talking about truth or reality or dimensions of reality or any of this, I used it as a mirror to say, there's something in me that hasn't put words to this yet, hasn't written about this yet, hasn't talked to anyone about this yet, hasn't cried about this yet. And it seems like there's a part of me that needs to do that. And then post trip, I could go into that and kind of finish that process of mourning that the world wasn't what I was raised to think it was, which it's a kind of death that I had never had a funeral for. And I think that it's the same way that people work with dreams. Like it's much better to actually use that as a way to say, what is this saying about me, than to say like, oh, I know for sure that I'm a spirit and I went to a spirit world and this is all true, or this is all prophetic. No, like it's far safer to use these things as mirrors for self-inquiry and self-discovery.
Thank you for going in and explaining exactly how you use that thinking tool. I think it's always best, if we're talking about practical philosophy, to give people like, here's how you do it.
No, you're right.
I guess I've used one similar in those situations of, the thinking tool is like, what does this mean if I'm not special? Which, I had this experience, maybe a revelation or something, but I'm not special. Conservative, ultra-right religious Christians have see God experiences and come to totally different understandings. So that leads you to the place of like,
that's another great question to ask yourself, which is like, how does this connect me to humanity, rather than like, how does this make me separate? Because a lot of people will start getting into like, I know the truth of the universe that nobody else does. I want everybody to do psychedelics. I'm going to become a psychedelic guy so I can give everyone this magical truth. And there's a bit of separateness in that, right? Whereas like your approach of saying like, what does this mean about maybe humanity in general, or in a way that doesn't make me special, that can bring people close together. And that was a very humbling part of my atheism journey, because at the beginning of it, I honestly did feel like I was better and smarter than people by rejecting religion. And over time came to realize like, wait, I didn't choose my core values. I didn't choose the unique set of core values that you would need to get to nihilism. You'd have to have like truth seeking as a high core value. I actually didn't choose that. And my brother didn't choose that loyalty was a high core value. And so I'm actually not better than anyone. I'm just operating under a different set of values that we all didn't choose. And that was super humbling for me. That was hard for me at first to take, but that's another good point to add in there.
Hey, Ian. Thanks for joining us in our sort of mid-episode WeCroak news moment.
Fantastic. Thanks for letting me pop in, Hansa. Always a pleasure to hang out and talk about the amazing world of WeCroak.
And we've got some really big news this week to announce to people about Leap. What's going on?
This is the biggest thing since Leap happened several years ago, first for the iPhone, and now finally Leap for Android, for the phone that the majority of people have around the world. I know you've been waiting, we've been waiting, and it's finally here. Leap for Android. You can now get the weekly challenges right on your device, on your Google Pixel, on your Samsung, on any device of your choice. And we're so excited for you to let your friends know who have always been curious about WeCroak or have wanted more from their current WeCroak experience. And now we're all doing the same leaps together, the same weekly challenges together across the world. It's so exciting.
Yeah. So we are small app makers trying to make apps that are good for our brains. And we haven't had, Android, iOS, iPhone parity. And we've asked for it again and again, and we finally do. So if you have an Android and you want to check out our monthly membership, go check it out. You'll go from having like 100 quotes, so you'll get repeats pretty often, to over 1,000 overnight, all hand curated by us. And you'll also get weekly challenges, other meditations you can do to get closer to some Death Salius insights and meditation. Which one are we doing? What's a recent leap so that people can hear it?
Here's a brand new, hot off the press leap. In the face of certain death, the absurdist school of philosophy and art insists that this is the perfect moment to laugh, to dance, and to create surreal art. This week, craft a joke, a poem, an interactive dance, or image that laughs absurdly in the face of death. Have fun, and the weirder, the better.
Yeah, so they're weekly challenges. You can do them or not, but a lot of people do them, and they're just a different way because Obviously WeCroak is, looking at death 5 times a day, just a lot, but there's a lot of other ways to look at this kind of stuff. And so if you haven't given Leap a try, it's only $1.99 a month, and there's a free trial. So whether you are an iPhone or Android, the best way to support this podcast or everything that we're doing is to just join Leap. Other quick things from the WeCroak news. We do have a Substack called Ask Death. You can find at WeCroak.com if you want to follow along there when we do a post there. And we made another app called Social Stomach that you can download. This is kind of an experiment on our belief that one of the simplest things you can do besides thinking of death often to improve your thinking in your life is to eat socially more. So this is an app just about nurturing that habit, coming into mindfulness about it. And we'd be really curious if some of you would give it a try, if you could tell us what you think, because it's brand new and we don't have a lot of people on it yet. So Social Stomach, it has kind of a fun birthday cake. So go check it out. And we probably shouldn't take too much of your time for WeCroak news. So unless you have anything else, Ian, back to the episode, yeah?
Back to the episode.
I think it's important to use these thinking tools for all kinds of experiences to make them safe. And we'll move on from psychedelics in just a second, but obviously, they are becoming more accepted in mainstream therapeutic, I guess, practice, but they're still largely illegal. And stuff like that. It's hard to find guides who know how to do it well and safely, as opposed to, in other ways. Do you have any ideas for how people can sort of navigate this landscape? Is it wait for it to become legal in your state and, do it sort of what may become the mainstream way? Do you really just need to go get your healing now? And hope for the best? Like, how do you navigate that?
I live in Idaho, so nobody listening to this ask me. Idaho is very very conservative state. I lean a little bit more on the side of like, if you're truly suffering, because it can be so helpful for treatment resistant depression and give you the energy to then kind of get going on that upward spiral. I'm more willing to say to take a risk here, or at least try to kind of ask around, because the reality is, like you said, it's becoming so mainstream, and because so many people grow their own, you actually do know someone who knows someone who does this. You really do. I really think everybody does. It's just not advertised, right? And so the places to look would be, I think, yoga meditation places. I also think farmers markets where people are selling just regular mushrooms. They'll know where the people growing other mushrooms are. And then the other one that I recommend is sound bath people. Like the Venn diagram of sound bath people and people who do psychedelic guiding is a circle. So there's something about that group of people. They're very body oriented, healing oriented. They just will always either know someone or be doing that themselves. That can be a place to go. Or just start, I just started asking around that, like, hey, have you ever read Michael Pollan? I've considered this or whatever. And eventually I found a friend of a friend that I really liked and trusted to be able to do it. And I live in Idaho. Like I don't live in Colorado. I don't live in California so I kind of recommend going that direction if you're really struggling, just because it gave me the energy to then do all the other kind of steps in the process.
Yeah. So we'll move on, but proceed carefully if you decide this is right for your journey out there. All right. So someone reaches out to you. They're in a nihilistic spiral. They're not enjoying life. Maybe it's, a life or death situation, as it is for many people. How do you help these people?
Yeah, so I don't work with people who are in active suicide plans. That would be something, because I'm not a therapist, that would be something that I have to ethically say, like, there's going to be better people for where you are right now. So the majority of nihilists that I'm working with are people in that kind of passive place where they have no plan. They just wouldn't mind if they didn't wake up the next day, is kind of where they're at. And that place I can work with. And so it depends on what got them into nihilism and kind of where they're stuck. The places that people get into nihilism is either like uh, the thinking people who get there with philosophy. You can get there with trauma. You can get there with suffering or sensitivity to suffering. There's a lot of places where people kind of get stuck in nihilism, but essentially it's this shift to experience, this shift into play. How do you experience connection? What is the story that your brain is operating under right now? And how can we make a story that can actually withstand the harsh truths of reality that we're dealing with? And we essentially, someone told me on TikTok the other day, you're just creating your own religion. And it's like, absolutely, I am. Like, religion is a cognitive technology that we created in order to deal with all of this shit. And so we essentially start building that person's religion from the ground up. What are rituals that we can do that help to ground you? What are if they're really stuck with death, then what is the fear that they have around death, and what are tools for that place so that we can be able to process that fear of death and do exposure therapy for death, which of course you talk about a lot. And so it depends on the person, but it's essentially building from the ground up, from that person's core values up. So we start with psychedelics is great anywhere along this process, but we really start with core values. And then, because that's great for nihilists, because you don't choose those. And that gives us a place to start. And then we can start building what does a life worth experiencing look like for you, and how to build our story and start making changes in your life towards that direction. And then it gives us a path.
All right. I like that. Can you hit me with your harsh truths? What are the harsh truths about life or the universe that you're probably going to encounter out there, that your system, whatever it is out there that you're trying to build, has to be robust enough to integrate?
Yeah. I meet people wherever they are. I usually don't. There's an ethical concern there as far as pushing people into too much truth that they consent to be able to handle.
Okay.
And so I tend to let the other person lead that. But common ones that come up would be the reality that you're going to die, the reality that in 3 generations you're going to be forgotten, and the last person who remembered you is also going to die, the reality that this Earth is going to hit the Andromeda galaxy and going to explode or blow up, or we'll blow each other up, or whatever's going to happen, and no one will know that we were here. The reality that evolution is pulling the strings and we can't see outside our own biases. The reality that we don't have free will and that the self is an illusion. That no one actually will ever know what it was fully like to be you, which is an existential fear of isolation. These are harsh truths. These are not cozy stories that we tell each other. We spend the majority of our time telling each other stories that kind of act as a blanket against these truths. But those would be some common ones that people are wrestling with in nihilism. And whether or not those things are true, like whether or not free will exists, if the person believes that they don't, we still have to deal with that.
Right. Exactly.
And so I'm not trying to convince anyone that those truths are ultimately true. I don't even know if we're interacting with ultimate truth. I'm just saying that if you believe those things to be true, you're going to have a story that can withstand that, a life of meaning in a world that's meaningless.
Yeah, I find the free will question to be a bit like arguing about the existence of God. It just, there's never going to be a resolution.
Yeah. We keep
I
hiding free will in new
opt that there is.
places.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, really, really, I don't do a lot with, people can read Robert Sapolsky and Sam Harris and Dan Dennett on that stuff. But what I really will work with is, if you don't believe you have free will, how can you actually work with the system of your own brain to actually lend it towards human thriving, even if you don't choose what human thriving for your meat suit actually is. And so it's actually learning how to work with a system that doesn't have free will.
Interesting. All right. So someone comes in, let's say they've just arrived at there's no meaning in the universe through thinking. They believe a few of these harsh truths and they don't like them and they're depressed. How do you go about helping them find something that makes life fun again?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do this. Um, and it's different for each person, which is why it's hard to like give someone a prescription. So, which is why sometimes psychedelics are so helpful because they can remind you what it's like when you were a child. But it's essentially getting honest about how does your meat suit suffer less. Let's even start there. How do you suffer less? We don't even have to use terms like happiness or bliss because these people haven't felt those emotions probably for a long time. But where do you suffer less? And the analogy that I often use is when you realize that no matter what sandcastle you make, the wave is going to come and take it away. If you're trying to make a sandcastle that lasts forever, you're just going to give up. There's no way that you can make a sandcastle that's going to outlast the waves. So you have to refocus life on what are the sandcastles that are worth building for the experience. Because when you were a child, you didn't build a sandcastle because you thought it was going to be your legacy. You built it because you just wanted to see if you could do it. You were just there in the pure experience of being in a body, playing with sand, making a little castle with a moat. And so you have to now get honest with yourself. And this is where nihilism can be a blessing, is that nihilism will strip everything away except for the honest, like the honest truth of what sandcastles are worth building for you just for the experience. It's the matter of like Sisyphus choosing the rock that you're going to push up the hill, even if it's ultimately meaningless. And so when I was in that place, I was like, I really want to work with people in this place. I find it so interesting. I find it so meaningful. How do I do that? Okay, I'm going to be an atheist spiritual director. What is that? I'm making it up as I go. Why? Because it's the sandcastle that I would most want to do for meaningful work. And these are the conversation that we're having right now. I've built my life so that I can have these kinds of conversations. You and I, for me right now, this is two kids building a sandcastle. We're making these mouth sounds at each other. We're playing this word game to try to share what it's like to be human for me, and you're sharing over there what it's like to be human for you. It's a kind of play. And so I've essentially built my life around the sandcastles that are worth building just for the experience. Now that doesn't mean that it's easy. Like, yes, capitalism, and yes, the world, and yes, suffering. And I'm raising 4 children in this. It's very difficult. But if I focus in on the things that truly matter and make me suffer less in this meat suit, and I build my life on that and take radical risks in that direction, it still for me is a life that's fundamentally worth experiencing.
That's beautiful. I want to go back to atheist spiritual director, which sounds like a paradox or
Yes.
one of those words that doesn't make sense.
Yes.
What does that role mean to you?
Yeah, so atheism, I'm not saying that I know for sure that there is no God. I'm using it in the more philosophical way. Somehow socially, it's, it started to mean that like agnosticism is not sure and atheism is sure that there is no God. I'm not using it in that way. Some people are using it that way in conversation. Atheism just means that I, I'm not convinced of the theistic God, and I'm not convinced really of any God or belief system. And then the spirituality is really saying, hey, there's tools in religion and spirituality that are worth integrating into your life, even if we don't know what is true about ultimate reality. These things still work. These things are still good for you. Some people just call it spicy psychology because so much of good spirituality is just good mental health. And so the game is like, how can I take these tools that religion has been a vessel for, awe, community, ritual, wisdom, contemplation, meaning, purpose? How can I brush off all the bullshit and the dogma and actually get the tool without the truth claim and integrate it into my life or my client's life in a way that's authentic. And for me, secular spirituality, atheistic spirituality is the best of both worlds. I feel like I get the tools and I don't get so much of the bullshit that limits human development or has a cost to society.
Yeah, basically an acknowledgement that even if you have rejected the idea of God or any organized religion, you're still going to need integrative tools.
Yeah, you're going to need
that we
something
generally call
to
spiritual.
human. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I have a very good friend of 20 years who has always been kind of an avowed atheist, and it's worked for him, and that's great. Recently had his mother pass away about a month ago, and we had lunch recently. And the very predictable thing that happens to so many people was happening to him, and he just shared with me like these really weird coincidences are happening, and it feels like my mom is trying to like tap me on the shoulder and say I'm here, and I don't know what to do with that. And of course I know, because I've read so many death books, that this is atheist, religious, whatever, this happens all the time. It's just, call it magical thinking, call it something beyond the veil. I don't think it necessarily tells us anything about the nature of existence. But no matter what you believe, just in the normal course of life, grief moments, for example, you're going to have weird mystical experiences. It's so common.
So like, what do I do with that as an atheist?
Yeah.
So I still find great value in those experiences. Our brains are meaning making machines. They are not statistical. They're not statistical gauges of reality. And so what a brain will do is, if you think of your mom 100 times, but on the 100th time that you're thinking of your mom calls right at that time, your brain actually will not actually remember that you did that 100 times and she didn't call. You'll just remember the pattern that has meaning, which is when you thought of her, she called right at that moment. It's hindsight bias. It's meaning making. It's what our brains do without us. Like we're not aware that our brains are always trying to fit things into patterns of meaning. And so I'm not against these things being real as far as you experience them. I just want to be careful that, like, because a butterfly landed on my shoulder, I know for sure that I'm not going to die. Like that to me is a jump that we can't make. What I can say is, that's really sweet for me, who's a little bit more skeptical. I would say something like that's, or we don't understand. I would say two things. I would say with synchronicities that we don't understand how connected we are. And that, I think, is true of science, that we're more connected than we currently have the science to understand. So there's some mystery in there for me, absolutely. But then also, I think even at a subjective level, if my brain was trying to make meaning that my mom mattered and our love for each other mattered, I think that that's sweet, even if she is gone. And so I think we can still find meaning in those things without jumping into the, I know for sure then that I don't actually die. That's when we get to, I think, a level of almost delusion where we're trying to cheat death again with new religions and new superstitions.
So you mean afterlife? I don't actually die. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
The butterfly. Okay.
Yeah. So people will see a butterfly and then it's a new way to cheat death. Whereas I think it's so much healthier to actually face death. And then these experiences can be magical and mysterious without you needing them to be true. Because when you need something to be true, you start clinging to it. You wrap your identity around it. You start making a religion around it. It becomes the bias by which you see the world. And that's a trap in its own way. And so, for example, it's very common when religious people leave religion that they start really getting into near-death experience stuff.
Okay.
And it's because it's a way for them. Their brain is looking for a new way to cheat death, a new story to cheat death. And so what I recommend for these people is, not that I know for sure that there's no afterlife, but what I recommend is, let's face your fear of death first, and then go into near-death experiences with total freedom for what may or may not be true about these stories. Because then we don't need anything to be true. We stop clinging to things to be true because we've actually faced the fear behind it. And for me, that tends to be a healthier approach.
Yeah, I like the face the fear first,
Yeah.
then
Then go
engage with
play.
some of
Then
this
then go
stuff.
play with what is true, and butterflies and synchronicities and near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. There's a lot of this stuff that is interesting and mysterious, and we sometimes feel like we have some science, sometimes we feel like we don't. But all of that is like playful for me because I don't need anything in that world to be true.
I like that. For me, I guess afterlife questions and in WeCroak will include quotes about death from any tradition, anyone who said anything interesting about death
Mm-hmm.
on the app. But I made an editorial decision at the very beginning that we include no quotes whatsoever about afterlife, because
Yeah, I
one of
love
the
that.
beautiful things about death salience is we all face it together. Everyone
Mm,
goes through this. We all have to contend with it. And so it's this universal moment where we can come together. But as soon as you start talking about afterlife, you start having major divisions where this religion
yeah,
says, you're going to hell. This religion says there is no afterlife. This religion says, it's reincarnation, and people start splitting and getting angry
yeah,
again. And I wanted this to be a
mm-hmm,
tool for everyone. So I just
mm,
leave that question out of it,
yeah, I love
even
that.
though it's one of the first things that people think about when they think about death is this
Yeah,
question of afterlife. Um, Personally, I don't think it's the real question. Um, I think there's much more interesting meditations or insights you can start thinking about, what are we? Who are we? You know,
mm,
what is an identity? Because if you were talking about, you or me and just that name and body and, what's happening here, it almost certainly goes away. There's no I believe, other place where that exact representation as it was in 2025
mm,
biological form, exists elsewhere. But identity is a lot bigger than that, or it can be. When you had the
mm,
insight that your kids were a part of you, and
mm,
running toward you and lighting up made you feel something, or
yeah,
someone can feel like they're on psilocybin and they feel like the trees are their friends and their
mm,
community, and all of a sudden like the natural world becomes part of their identity. And
yeah.
I think that idea, if we're not just ourselves, the idea of afterlife becomes a lot more complicated and interesting.
Yeah, I feel like that's a natural progression for people that when they face their fear of death, then the mystery of death, they just seem to spend less time on it because, like, okay, I'm going to die and, it may be nothing, it may be something. I don't know, but I seem to be alive in this moment. And there
Yeah.
seems to be, a natural shift that happens that if you can face the fear, you kind of spend a lot less time obsessing about what the next life is.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is I feel like we're in a very nihilistic moment.
Hmm.
um, People are throwing that word fascism around just politically. I kind of feel like what I see as, sort of the powerful, the people in power right now seem to be a coalition between religious fundamentalists and moral nihilists, which seems like such a weird union. But
Hmm.
there's just 20 years ago, there weren't that many nihilists, and now they're everywhere. I hear them on podcasts, I hear them in political content, and it feels often very toxic. And I'm just wondering if maybe you don't have any insights into this moment. What does a world look like where nihilism is rampant, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. So this is all, you can't have this conversation without bringing up Nietzsche because he really predicted uh, with pretty good accuracy that after the death of God, we would experience nihilism and that it would not be good. And so when, sometimes, especially kind of young philosophical dude bros will talk about the death of God like it's some amazing thing, but Nietzsche really mourned this because he didn't think that we'd be able to survive it. And he recognized that as people were deconstructing religion and as the Enlightenment was deconstructing religion, that we were losing a lot more than we realized. And the vacuum that's going to be left behind in the death of God may be worse than what God was. And of course, I can talk about all the evils of God and religion till the cows come home, but it may be that what shows up in the vacuum of God may be worse. And what we saw in the 20th century seemed to play that out, is that when we don't have some kind of system that gives us tools for meaning and suffering and death and the afterlife and all these things, we will start to cling to political religions. And political religions are often worse than theological religions, because at least with theological religions, like, you'll bump into a story about Jesus that challenges you. You'll get some love one another. You'll get some soul stuff. You'll get some wisdom. Political religions can be all the worst dogma of religion, but with no soul. You're never wrong if you're in a political religion. The other side is always evil, right? And so he predicted that the first thing that we would do in the shadow of the death of God would be to create political gods and political religions, which it does seem like we're doing with not only the wars of the 20th century and people like Stalin and things like that, but also even just the rise of nationalism and Trump in our own country, that when we sense that chaos, we start to cling back to order, and we're gonna go to consumerism and political religions, which in many ways can be worse than even the religions that we had before. So we're in this place where, you're right, nihilism used to be something that only philosophers talked about in ivory towers, like only like Leo Tolstoy would talk about it, but like most people were not reading Leo Tolstoy. So we're in this place now where now 16-year-olds are having deep, like real philosophical thoughts around nihilism and what is the point. But the gap between like a 16-year-old and all the suffering that they see in the world, because they got less of a nest period that everybody else did because we grew up without the internet. And then they don't have access to things like absurdism or wisdom traditions or mentorship or any of the things that can help with nihilism. I'm getting younger and younger clients. I'm getting 18-year-olds that just really feel like there's no reason to exist, and that not only that maybe it's the most moral thing to do to die. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Palm Springs bombing of a fertility clinic. That usually fertility clinics are bombed by religious fundamentalists, but this guy was a nihilist. He had a nihilist manifesto. He really truly believed that bringing life into the world was fundamentally evil, and he tried to live stream his bombing. And we see nihilism in school shooters, in the manifestos and journals of school shooters. So we are in this place of can we survive the death of God, and is that going to just fling us right back to fundamentalism, the rise in Islam, young men going back to religion, fascism? Or if we can develop more tools in the secular world, could we be able to outgrow God because we have the tools in society that will help people the way that religions used to? The secular world isn't there yet. The question is, can it get there? We actually don't know the answer to that question, which is why we're here.
And it seems like you're innovating one person at a time, trying to help pull people out of nihilism.
I'm trying, but it is hard. Religion has this leg up on everything because it has more money. Like dogma drives money, drives resources, drives power. If you're trying to do this without dogma, without money, without a building, without tithing, it's instant. You're instantly at a disadvantage. Some people
without
think
tax
that
exempt status.
like some people think secularism is never going to get there for that reason, because dogma automatically garnishes more power and then wins. And there's some truth to that argument. I'm going to fight anyway.
Yeah.
But
I think it's
there
an
may be some
important
truth.
mission for our times. And thank you for being one of the people to step up. Because I hear a lot of people bemoaning nihilism in this age, but not a lot of voices proactively being like, okay, here's what you do to get out of this, or like,
Yeah.
here's how to really confront these issues and integrate them. Um, what are you most excited about right now? What do you think can help people either on a one-on-one
Hmm.
basis or at scale?
Yeah, it's difficult because what I see is that light nihilism, that kind of bemoaning nihilism and complaining about capitalism and all that stuff. What it can often do for people is give them a reason not to try. And I do see that a lot where, like, because there's no justice in the universe, because even if I adopt one dog, there's just so many thousands of dogs that are just, suffering and being euthanized and all that. And it becomes so hopeless that essentially people give up. And what I'm excited about is there's a way that like light nihilism can be that just like burnout, I'm just not going to try because what's the point? But if you can really get into that, it's almost like if you can hit rock bottom enough where you're suffering enough to actually push through that because you have nothing to lose, it can actually create the most beautiful and authentic lives I've ever seen. People will completely change their lives top to bottom and be living in a way that when they get on their deathbed, they don't regret the life that they lived because they did it eyes wide open to the life that they were building each day. Each day, I really focus on what do I want to experience being alive today, and how do I want to focus into that, and so I just see that there's so many people that are able to use nihilism as a catalyst to push against the pressures of society to make an ethical, meaningful life that's going to look different. Like it really is going to look different. For me, for example, like I have like 7 t-shirts. I decided that for me, fashion and clothing was not going to be a thing that I spend my time on and money on just because I don't fundamentally care about it. And so I started saying yes to things and then saying no to a lot of things. And it just led to a life that nobody else could live this life except me because it's uniquely me. And I see more and more people getting into that space. Nietzsche believed that individuals would be able to do that. He had a lot of reservations about whether we're going to be able to do that collectively. But seeing that process, even in individual people, has been really beautiful to watch. That nihilism can be a black hole, but it can absolutely be the catalyst that helps you create a life that is so worth living and so unique to you that literally no one else could live it but you. And I find that to be extraordinarily existentially courageous and extraordinarily beautiful.
Beautiful. So let's say out there somewhere, someone listening has a friend who's starting to sound nihilistic in a kind of way that's scary. Just like they're sounding like they don't love life anymore. How do you recommend, someone being a good friend or family member to that person?
What's really hard about sitting with a person in nihilism is that if you really sit in that space, they're going to challenge the blanket that you're holding on to, which is why most nihilists feel alone. Because most nihilists, if they start to kind of take off their mask and share with someone what they're dealing with, at some point, someone's going to say, like, this is a little bit much for me. Now, they may not say it so nicely. They may just say, like, you need Jesus, or like, go back to God, or like,
Yeah.
or they say like, oh, you're just being depressed. Like there's something subconscious where they're recognizing that there's something about you that's going to untangle their own little stories that they're operating under. And so that's what makes it so hard to sit with a nihilist if you have a lot of stories that you're clinging to, is because by them opening up in that way, they're going to challenge you. And so for most people, that's going to come off as them being defensive, and then you just stop sharing yourself because everyone's just going to be defensive and no one's going to be able to sit there. So if you're trying to sit with that person and you actually do want to sit with that person, you're just going to have to be self-aware enough to notice your own triggers and still be able to sit in that place. And that's going to challenge you. It's going to be hard. It takes a self-aware person to do that. And it's why I so feel called to sit with people in that space, because there's nothing that anyone can say that scares me at this point or makes me put up my guard at this point, because I've been in this hole before and explored this black hole as much as anyone can. So I just would recommend that you have to really be aware of your own triggers that will cause you to put up a wall that then will limit the other person's ability to feel like they can open up to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been through plenty of dark nights of the soul, but nihilism hasn't been one of them. So how to deal with that has actually been a pretty great riddle that I've been just, as it comes up more and more, just like, what is going on? What do I even do in this situation?
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say that personality types that are like the most dangerous combination is if you're a deep feeler, a deep thinker, and you're low in extroversion and high in neuroticism. That tends to be the combination that shows up the most. So for people who go through dark nights of the soul and they just kind of move on and just kind of start living their life, and they seem to be mostly okay, they tend to just suffer less by nature. They tend to either be high in extroversion or they're low in neuroticism, or both, where their brain just suffers less. They enjoy life more. But if you're super neurotic, like if you take the Big Five personality test and you're really high in neuroticism and low in extroversion, your brain just suffers more by nature, which means you're just going to need more tools and resources to get to the place that you kind of can do naturally. So a lot of people are like, will go through a dark night of the soul and kind of turn into an optimistic nihilist, like, oh, there's no meaning in the universe, I'm going to create my own. Great, this is fantastic. I was not one of those people. I had to work at it really hard, but that's a lot more not, it's not because I'm more philosophical or deep, or I'm seeing something that you're not. It's just, I think sometimes this personality type suffers more by nature and then maybe needs a little bit more help to get there. At least that's the theory that I'm working on. I'm not sure if that's always true, but that tends to be the personality combination that I deal with the most.
Say that again. Neurotic.
High in neuroticism.
So those are
low
thought loops, right? Getting
Yeah,
caught in
so
thought
like,
loops.
yeah,
Okay.
like negative, you ruminate about negativity. You're
Right.
ruminating
Okay.
about negativity. And then extroversion, the more extroverted you are, you know, the higher your happiness is going to be in life. Introverts, so if you're introverted and you ruminate about dark things, that's going to be difficult. And then deep feelers, so you're sensitive to suffering, and then deep thinkers, where you can't think yourself out of thought loops that you've thought yourself into. Those four together tend to be the people that are the highest in nihilistic, thinking.
So overactive empathy, feeling the
Yeah.
suffering of others all the time.
Yeah, like the nature, like if you're really bothered by the nature of suffering. There's that one famous photograph of the guy who took the picture of the starving Sudanese child, and there's a vulture behind. It won like a Pulitzer Prize in 1994, I think. And then 6 months later, he killed himself. Like he could not, that image that he saw, he essentially couldn't live in a world where that existed. So we see a lot of that, or a deep thinker, or often both.
Have you ever worked with the Buddhist doctrine against empathy as a tool?
Not directly, no. How do you use it as a tool?
Well, it's kind of a beautiful 1-2 punch, and they have a really important distinction between empathy and compassion, where empathy is where you feel the suffering of others, and
Yeah.
compassion is when you just act kindly toward the suffering of others.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the idea is in Buddhism that we're trying to decrease. And I use the we, even though I'm not really a Buddhist, but but I do believe in this project. They're trying to decrease the suffering in the universe and the world. And when you are responding in empathy towards someone else's suffering, taking it on, you immediately double the suffering. So
Yeah. I
Don't do
do
that.
talk yeah, I do talk about that. I'm gonna have to dig into, uh, exactly how the Buddhists do that. I kind of came at it more of at a kind of therapy space of, um, if yeah, you're right. Like if suffering is bad, and let's start there, then limiting suffering is good. And if I start my day just kind of doom scrolling, then I'm less likely to be able to show up in a way that reduces suffering. And so it's actually better for myself and the world, if suffering is bad, that I limit the amount of suffering that I'm holding to just the amount that I can hold and do something about. And so that is a big piece of what I do, is giving people permission, because it does sound like there's kind of this trope that especially white women are like, oh, you can put limits to seeing suffering, and you can just rebel by being happy. And of course, like, the meme is like, says white woman who has done no other form of rebellion, right? And I do use people see that as spiritual bypassing, but people in nihilism aren't really, spiritually bypassing in that way. And so what I have to tell people is, like, you are a finite creature. Our bodies were meant to hold like 150 people. We were not meant to hold the suffering of the world. And so if you're holding that and then just being depressed on your couch for 2 weeks and crying, which is then not allowing you to limit suffering in the world, then you're actually not helping. And so it's actually okay. Not only is it okay, it's necessary to limit the amount of suffering that you're holding to just enough that you're able to do something about. So for me, I will sometimes take a break from the news, not and that sounds very privileged and that sounds awful, but it's because there's sometimes I see 6 nihilistic clients in a day, and that's heavy. It's very heavy. I have to sit with that. And if I'm going to watch the news that night, I'm not going to be able to show up with my 4 clients the next day that may be on the ledge in their own ways. And in the end, I just had to accept that I'm a finite creature, and that has to be enough.
Yeah. And of course, as you bring up, like, the idea isn't to just cut yourself off in this, wisdom tradition. It is to
Yeah.
practice compassion, which is, you notice someone suffering, ask what you can do, give them a helping hand, step up, be kind.
Mm,
But don't put yourself in your shoes. Don't like use your imaginative force to imagine in detail what they're going through and feel the
yeah.
suffering with them. Just be
Yeah.
kind. And if you don't do that second part of be kind, then you're just an asshole. Of
Right.
course.
Yeah.
Uh, but I love that one. Do you have any books you recommend, either for nihilism or just in life?
Yeah, I'm about 3/4 the way writing this book, which is the book that you would give someone in active existential crisis. So I'll be excited to share that with you, hopefully in the next 6 months, maybe a year, because I really wanted to focus in on that. I did write a book called No Nonsense Spirituality, where I go over, for someone who doesn't believe, like all the aspects of essentially what religions do, and then how to get that, like the science behind it, and then how to integrate that tool in your life without having to believe in anything at all, or whatever your beliefs are. For nihilism specifically, yeah, it just depends on if they want to read, like, if they want to read philosophy, or if they want to do something maybe a little bit lighter. For the meaning crisis, I always recommend John Vervaeke. There's the Sunny Nihilist, which some people have found helpful, but I'm hopefully writing the book that would talk about all the things that we talked about today. So
I
that
can't
one's
wait.
that one's coming. Yeah, because a lot of this.
Definitely reach out when it's out.
Yeah, we'll do.
I will put it out on our platform so
Because
we can have a
the
conversation about that book in particular.
Yeah, one of the problems is that we have to bring nihilism out of the philosophy space, because, like, again, like, if you're just someone who really has no interest in philosophy, but you just feel like there's no purpose in life, then a lot of the resources for nihilism are kind of out of your grasp, because they just require a certain level of either education or academia or philosophy. And so I do want to, like, we're having a hard time kind of bringing all those tools out of the ivory towers for just the average person to say, like, how do I build a life if religion doesn't give it to me?
Yeah, these are the most important questions. And if someone has enjoyed this conversation today, wants to hear more, maybe wants to follow you on social media or listen to more of your podcast episodes, where can they do that?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel that's entirely devoted to nihilism recovery, and it's called No Nonsense Spirituality. I'm on TikTok and Instagram under the same name, book under the same name, and website under the same name. So wherever you find me, it'll be No Nonsense Spirituality.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Britt.
Yeah, my pleasure.